I've been starting to use the internal renderer in Pro Tools a lot more for doing Dolby Atmos stuff. There's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, it makes it a little easier for me because I don't have to switch my playback engine. I'm on a HD native setup in here, and when I use the external renderer, I have to switch over to the Dolby Atmos bridge to make the whole thing work. But it's a little easier if I can just stay on the HD native side for the playback engine, because some of the other things I do, I need to be native in HD native. So there's that. The other big thing for me is I'm still on an older Mac setup. I'm on an Intel Mac setup, and it's still going to be a few months before I can upgrade over to the new Apple Silicon. And I just feel like I'm getting a little bit better performance using the internal renderer right now, probably because I don't have as much other stuff running. So as I've been moving into the internal renderer, I thought I would show you some of the things that I have set up in my session that are helping me work with the internal renderer and basically being able to do a lot of the same things that I was doing with the external renderer. One of the big things that I was missing in the internal renderer initially was doing the re-renders. I have a lot of re-renders that I run when I'm using the external renderer. The re-renders are basically, they're just different fold downs, and I have a lot of different fold downs configured. So first thing we got to do is we got to hop into the IO setup and get some of that stuff configured. All right, so first up, I need my loudness re-render configured. I use that as a 5.1. You can also set it up to 2.0 or disabled. I think having the 5.1 is really important. If you are mixing Atmos music content, there are very specific delivery specs that we need to hit, and the loudness measurement for those specs is based on a 5.1 re-render. So right away, got to have the 5.1 re-render. Then I need my headphone re-render, which in this case is binaural. It could also be the 2.0, but for me, since I'm doing music, I am real concerned with the binaural. Now, the nice thing in Pro Tools that they recently added, and I'm in Pro Tools 2024.3, by the way, the new thing that they added recently is this custom re-renders button. So I'm going to pop this open. These are all of my kind of standard re-renders, and I actually have a preset for them, default re-renders. Usually I just name this mix. These are important to me for a couple of reasons. If I'm going to print an Atmos mix offline and I want to print a bunch of re-renders, I'm going to need to have those set up in here. The other thing that's nice in here, though, is I can turn these on and make them live. Now, I don't need to turn on the binaural because the binaural is already there as the headphone re-render, and I don't need to turn on the 5.1 because the 5.1 is already there as a loudness re-render. Sometimes I will use this 7.1 running live, and sometimes I will also use this 7.1.4. Some of you may be interested in having the 7.1.4 in your session if you are trying to do Apple's Spatial audio. If you want to monitor that, having that 7.1.4 in there could be helpful. I have a different way of getting it into my system, which I'll show you, but if you don't want to use the way I'm doing it, you might want to have that there. Now, I leave these off to start with because the thing I found is as I turn these on, it just uses more DSP for the system. So I will leave them off unless I really kind of need them. And lately I've been getting by with just the 5.1 and the binaural. So let's hop into my actual template and I'll show you how I've got some of this stuff set up. I have a folder in my template that is all of my internal renderer stuff. When I switch over to the external renderer, I will just disable these tracks. I still use the external renderer for some things. Sometimes it's just a little easier for me still to work with the external renderer. External renderer is more powerful than the internal one. So I have this folder of stuff. In fact, let's just, why don't we just show only this folder? All right, so all of these tracks in here, these are all aux tracks, and they're all set to different channel widths depending on what I need them to do. The main three that I'm using is this 5.1 re-render, the 2.0 re-render, and the binaural. Now, I showed you earlier, I don't have a 2.0 re-render running, but the way I can get that is with the 5.1, I just use the down mixer plugin, and the 2.0 re-render uses the ITU down mix protocol, which, go figure, Avid has a preset built in right there. That's this ITU R BS775 5.1 to stereo with LFE muted. That is how the Dolby Atmos renderer creates the 2.0 re-render. So we don't need to have a live one running. We can just use the 5.1 and create it ourselves. And I think it's a little lighter on the DSP doing that. So the way I have these two set up is as the input, just go right down here to re-renders. I've got two options right now because those are the only two live re-renders I have running. I've got loudness and I've got the binaural. So in this case, it has to be the loudness setup because it's a 5.1. Now on this aux track, I have a loudness meter. Right now, I'm using Insight from Isotope. Nice thing with Insight, if you haven't used this before, is I can set up the scale to be relative, which is kind of nice because then when I define my target, which is -18 and the peak is -1, this integrated loudness right here, which is the important measurement for measuring loudness for Atmos, that will show me where I am relative to my target. Like, am I a dB too hot? Am I a dB below? It's okay to go below it. We just can't go over it. So that's something I kind of like having in there. You may prefer to have it read what the actual LUFS are, but it makes it a little easier for me to just be able to look at that because I'm just trying to get to the target. So now you'll notice each of these is routing to a different output for me. 5.1 re-render goes to my monitors 5.1. The 2.0 re-render goes to my stereo monitors. And then I've got my binaural monitors. These all correspond to different settings I have in Dadman, in the Matrix Studio, which I'm using as my monitor controller. So you can just think of it as these are outputting to different inputs on my monitor controller. And if I go back up into I/O, I can show you if I find them because they're not all in the same spot. So here's my monitor stereo. Like I've got that going to outputs 15 and 16. Down here, I've got the 5.1. Those go 17 to 22. I've got a 7.1 setup, which goes 23:30. And then my binaural is 31 to 32. And these output routings match the same outputs that I had set up in the external renderer for the re-renders. So it makes it real easy for me to go back and forth between the internal renderer and the external renderer. For monitoring these, I just have buttons set up on my monitor controller. Right now, I've been using the Andrew Shep's Mom Deck, which controls Dadman. I've got it on my Stream Deck. I love it. Works with SoundFlow. It is awesome. So what about Apple Spatial Audio? So I have another aux here. I don't monitor this all the time, but I'll make this active a minute. For monitoring spatial audio, I have a 714 aux set up. Now, it doesn't look like a 714 aux set up right now because I have the binaural renderer plugin for Apple Music. Some people have been calling this, I think, BRAM, or whatever I've seen in the forums. This is a plugin from Audio Movers. Basically, it utilizes the engine in the OS to give us the spatial audio. And I just have this inserted on a 714 track, and then I output it to my same binaural output that I'm using up here. So if I want to listen to the binaural, which is Dolby's, basically their version of the binaural, it's what you would currently hear on Amazon or Tidal if somebody's listening to Atmos and headphones. If I want to listen to that, I just unmute the binaural. If I want to listen to the Apple version, I can just toggle it, unmute the spatial audio, and mute the binaural, and then it all shows up in the same place on my monitor controller so that I can listen to it in my headphones. Now, to get the 714 in, I have a setup in Dadman. Let me bring it over. So I have this set up right now. I've got the 714 that basically I'm using to monitor in here on my speakers. That is also being sent out Dante on my Dante network. And then that Dante comes back in to my machine. And then if I go up into my I/O, let's go over to input. If I look in the aux I/O, right down here, this is that Dolby Atmos Renderer 714. That is my Dante coming back in, which shows up here as an input. And I have it labeled as DAR, so it's the Dolby Audio Renderer 714. So that comes back in. I set that as an input, so I get my 714 back in, and then I can listen to the spatial audio. There is a bit of latency on this compared to the live 714 that's going on and the re-renders, simply because I'm going out Dante and coming back in Dante. Dante adds a little bit of latency. Not a big deal. I just use this to monitor it and to check it every once in a while, make sure that the spatial audio sounds okay. I don't spend lots and lots of time listening to the headphone side of things. I check them and make sure everything sounds okay. But most of the time I spend it on speakers, because all of the headphone versions of Atmos are trying to recreate the speakers. And as those headphone versions keep evolving and getting closer and closer to the speakers, it's ultimately the speakers that are going to matter. I'm basically checking these the way I would check an alternate set of speakers, like listening in the car. It's like a car check for me, listening to that stuff. Something that's real important to me going between the internal renderer and external renderer is making sure that my binaural settings are the same. So I still keep these plugins in here. I have my binaural settings plugin here. I have a preset that basically matches the same binaural settings I have in the internal renderer. Really important to make sure that these are all set up the same, because a lot of times I am doing an initial mix these days on the internal renderer, but when I'm getting close to finishing things, I jump over to the external renderer. Well, I find it helpful to have insight, and I've also been starting to experiment with decibel from Process Audio. The metering I've got in Pro Tools, the Loudness Metering, I don't find that it exactly matches what's in the Dolby Atmos Renderer. And when I'm really trying to nail a spec, I like to check it in the external renderer. Sometimes it's easier and faster for me to just flip over to the external renderer, do a measurement in there, make my mix adjustments, and then be done with it. And then a lot of times, since I'm over in the external renderer, when I have to start printing mixes, I will just print them through the external renderer. So that's where I'm at right now. I would imagine in the next 3 to 6 months, that will probably start to change for me. But for now, this is where I'm at. So hope you find that helpful. Hope that gives you some ideas for working with the internal renderer. If you've got Atmos questions, please leave a comment. You can also reach out to me at my website, staglsound.com. I do private one-on-one Atmos training. If you're looking to get help with getting things set up, you can contact me through there and we can work something out and get it all going for you. So thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.